Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the first Utility Broadband Alliance webinar. Today, we're going to be focused on opportunities for private broadband networks. My name is Bobbi Harris, and I'll be your moderator for today's broadcast. We have quite a few people still joining, so we want to perhaps hold just a moment. But while we're holding for those folks to join us, all attendees are muted and in listen-only mode. You should have a questions tab on your dashboard, and you can submit questions in writing there for the panelists. And at the end of the presentations, we will get to as many of those questions as possible. If perhaps we run out of time and can't get to your question, we will be following up via email to be sure that we get everyone's questions answered to the best of our ability. Okay, I have us at about 2 minutes after the hour, so to respect everyone's time, I would like to go ahead and continue with our webinar. First, let me take a chance to introduce you all to our speakers today. I'll do just a brief introduction, and then prior to each one speaking, I'll give you their full bios. Each of our speakers today, Matt Olson from Burns & McDonnell, oops, go back. John Hughes from Ameren, Alan McIntyre from Southern Link, and Scott Wells from Ericsson are all founding members of the Utility Broadband Alliance and serve in the Alliance's working group leadership. This is our agenda for today. Our speakers are going to focus on these key topic areas, and this should give our audience several different perspectives on private utility broadband networks. For those of you who don't know who the Utility Broadband Alliance is as host of this first webinar, let me give you just a little bit of background. The Utility Broadband Alliance is a collaboration of utilities and technology partners that are dedicated to the advancement and development of private broadband networks for America's critical infrastructure industries. At the moment, we have 23 members, and they participate on 4 working groups. You can see our current members list here. We are adding members almost daily, so it's an exciting time. The Alliance was launched officially back at Distributech, some of you may remember. Since that time, with those few interested parties in the beginning, we have worked hard to stand up 4 working groups and to begin the missions and the topic agendas for each one of those working groups. These Alliance members, through those working groups, are creating resources that will accelerate the utility journey toward a secure, resilient, and modernized grid, of course, with communications infrastructure as the strong backbone of that grid. If you're interested in more information about joining the Utility Broadband Alliance, you can contact me directly, and my contact information will be at the end of the webinar. Or, of course, you can go to UBBA.com and get more information. Now I want to turn over control to Matt Olson of Burns & McDonnell. Matt is the director for Burns & McDonnell's Networks Integration and Automation Department, where he oversees the execution of telecommunications and automation projects within the transmission and distribution business. He's an expert in application security and compliance with NERC cyber and physical security standards. And Matt earned his Bachelor of Science and Master of Science in Electrical Engineering from the University of Tulsa. He is also a registered engineer in Kansas and New Jersey. Matt, I think you have control, sir.
Thank you, Bobbi. Today I wanted to share a little bit of our perspective from working on deploying broadband utility networks for a couple of our various different clients. And we've observed a couple of things over the years. One, the need for increased bandwidth has been ever increasing, and so therefore we need to look at broadband networks that have the ability to scale and adapt going forward. One of the technologies that we think is a great fit in this space is the use of point-to-multipoint cellular LTE technology. And here's a couple reasons why. Through history, we've always thought of a network being built out for a singular purpose, and when we wanted to upgrade it, we had to upgrade the entire network at once. So in this case, because we're using an open air interface between the radio base station equipment and the field equipment, we have the ability to integrate multiple different vendors. Because this is a worldwide standard, the radio technologies that are being used support multiple different spectrum bands, as well as different profiles. So we can find devices at the best price point that meet our specific applications. For example, we can have a broadband modem off of the same base station serving a high-speed substation, maybe with a video surveillance camera, but then we can have a narrowband IoT device served off that same base station that might be buried in a vault in a downtown area, and we can do all of that with the same infrastructure. The third point is that this technology can interoperate with the public network. It's always been that we've had to build an entire radio access network, and then we could start adding devices on it. And only after we built out that network, we now have the ability to deploy devices and let them associate with either the public network or the private network. Obviously, we want to have the control of owning a private infrastructure, but we can get the resiliency of also having access to a public network because we are following the international standard. So there's a couple other things that are great when we follow a standard, and that is that we have to think about interoperability and duration. LTE is standardized by the 3GPP partnership, and it is a standard that is now in its 15th, working on its 16th revision, but a technology like LTE we've had in place since revision 8, spanning over 15 years at this point. So we are able to add new capabilities to it without necessarily upgrading every device. And what that results in is we can deploy devices for a particular application and they can stay there. The modems, the field device can stay there for the duration of that particular deployment. For instance, if we install Recloser, we don't necessarily have to change that radio out, even though we might add new capabilities to the system by upgrading the radio infrastructure. We'll talk more about that. We can build out private infrastructure, so we have control of the repair, the implementation, the maintenance, but we've also experienced the fact that we want to have control over the replacement life cycle. We all love the convenience and easy access to the commercial network, but they're motivated by different motivations than a utility. And as we've seen, the replacement life cycles have been faster than what we would have liked in the utility networks as we've moved from 2G to 3G to 4G. We'll talk more about the 4G to 5G transition. Scott will later in this presentation. It allows us to have independence between the RAN and the field devices because of this international standard in the ecosystem. So we don't have to go in and do a rip and replace like we've done with private voice or data networks when we had to upgrade all of the field devices, build out a new infrastructure, upgrade the field devices, and then tear out the old system. Now we can do those independently. And that gives us a couple of key points. In device lifecycle, I think that devices will last approximately 15 years. There's not a lot of innovation going on in individual devices. And once we have one of those devices, we can leave it out there and it operate for an extended period of time. When we talk about the radio area network, we might have to do a firmware or hardware upgrade to it, maybe on the 7 to 10 year life cycle, because there will be new capabilities that we want to leverage or add new capacities. And then in the core of the network where the main software is located, we might be updating that on a 3 to 5 year basis. Now that everything's virtualized, we can do that in individual containers while the system is operating without having to replace the entire system. So how can we afford this? And there's a couple of key concepts that come from following a standards-based approach. The first question that I often get is, hey, I need to go out and acquire spectrum to make this work. And it's definitely a challenge to locate spectrum in your environment because there's lots of different parties that want to use that spectrum. But we often get asked if spectrum's the most expensive cost. And while it is an expensive part of the network, we would give it a rating of 2 out of 5 of the overall cost. The next part is the core, and while the core itself might cost a couple of millions of dollars just sitting to itself because you only buy one of those in the network, it allows you to spread that cost out over lots of devices. And if you're having a simple implementation, there are now core implementations that can literally be implemented in the base station and cost a few thousand dollars. Then there's the radio access network. These are the base station radio towers, and we would consider them the third most expensive part of the RAN, but really where we save and are able to justify in the overall network deployment cost is in the field devices. You see all of these smartphone handsets down at the bottom. Those are all of the devices that have been developed and shipped in the quantity of billions throughout the world. And because we're following that standard, we can get a very sophisticated radio that has LTE, Wi-Fi, GPS, multiple bands of LTE technology, and Bluetooth in a component chip cost that is tens of dollars, and then an integrated delivered product good in a few $100s. And so while this is the overall aggregate biggest cost of building out the RAN or building out the entire network, because the per device costs are lowest, it ends up saving us in the overall cost of the network. So by using standards and lowering the cost of each of our individual components that we deploy the most in the network, this technology becomes more affordable than some dedicated utility technologies. So high volume standards for devices are the secret for being able to deploy these types of networks. When we look at the overall total cost of ownership over a 20-year period, saving a few dollars per device is what allows these networks to be cost justified, as well as bringing together all of your different radio networks all under one umbrella. So instead of building private voice network, private data network, leasing some high-speed circuits for particular applications, the fact that this technology can meet all of those needs allows us to bring it in cheaper as a combined network than each of the individual components. The last thing is you don't necessarily have to build out a RAN to be able to control your own devices. We know that most utilities are building out their field area networks today by adding devices, and many utilities are using cellular technology to make that happen. If you own the SIM cards that go within them, and you can do that by first signing up with an inter-exchange carrier that sits here in the middle of the network that has the signaling and the core infrastructure. You can either choose to lease the core from them, or in this case, when you start to deploy your type A network here, you deploy a few of these devices: the home subscriber server, the authentication database, the mobility engine, which keeps track of where the devices are, and the packet gateways, which are doing the routing. You can have devices that are on the commercial network, so AT&T and Verizon and other service providers that are out there today, that you own the SIM card. So instead of a SIM card coming from that service provider, you are able to host that. And by doing that, as you decide to build out your RAN, so as you add your EU train over here to your private network, you can decide where you want to make that investment to build. So maybe instead of building it all out up front, you build it out as you have a need in the area. This diagram also shows how you can work out agreements with other service providers. So B network up here might be a well-known provider like AT&T or Verizon. C network down here might be another service provider that you've not heard of that happens to own radio equipment in your technology and is also reselling to AT&T and Verizon. And then lastly, there can be connections to a third service provider that by getting access to this provider over here, they provide you access to the RAN of the area, and your devices, once you're in your SIMs, can roam nationwide. So that's an easy way that you can get into the deployment of technology without necessarily having to build out the RAN yourself. Bobbi, back to you.
Great. Thank you, Matt. That really set the stage for us. Clearly, those standard-based systems are going to be crucial for success moving forward. Next up, we have John Hughes from Ameren. John is the Director of IT Network Engineering and Operations at Ameren, where he has worked his entire 30-year professional career in the engineering and information technology arena. John has a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering from the University of Missouri-Columbia and his MBA from Webster University in St. Louis. In addition to his work with the Utility Broadband Alliance, he currently serves as an advisor to EPRI's PDU Information Communication and Technology Program Advisory Board, as well as an advisor for AT&T Energy Council. John, we will let you take it away, sir.
Thank you very much, Bobbi. Nice job, Matt. Hopefully we can connect some of the dots. On this first slide, I like this slide because it illustrates the high-level picture of what Ameren views the connected grid of the future. And it's our opinion that the connected grid, will be the center of value creation as we move forward as a utility. And you see all the types of technology, a large emphasis away from core generation just into utilizing the grid, driving efficiency and capabilities. But when you think about the grid and the vastness of what we have to support, communications becomes a very strategic asset in the delivering and meeting these expectations. Not only those known capabilities you have today that you have to meet, but the future capabilities and even these emerging technologies that might offer up new customer value. And we think doing so is going to require a very pervasive standards-based environment. I also think utilities need to look at their communication network more strategically, look at it across the enterprise, and be thought of as a strategic asset and not a tactical asset. So when you build use cases, are we looking at a highly standardized environment across the platform that we can evolve to that meets those expectations Matt was talking about interoperability and adjusting the life cycle of? And are your use cases being done as one-off use cases, or are you providing a platform that those business partner use cases just can evolve and it enables them? And that's kind of how we think about our environment. Bobbi, if you go to the next slide. Thank you. Sorry for the pause. I put a lot in one slide. I don't have a lot of slides, but I wanted to share with you Ameren's point of view. So our strategy around network comms, and I don't limit it to just the wireless piece of our communication strategy, is to build that robust, highly secure private enterprise based on this model, and it follows our business and possibly new businesses. Network's going to be viewed as a strategic asset, which will support the grid connectivity and future customer value. When I think about this network, I put it into different swim lanes: our wide area network, our common backhaul. Ameren is putting in a robust fiber optic network, replacing a lot of our lease circuits and some of our microwave shops. We're doing this to eliminate all dependency on the carriers and their lease circuits. And we'll be running an MPLS network, moving off some of the sonnet rings that we have out there today. Currently, we're about 40% in service on this project. We'll be finished by 2023 and cover over 4,500 miles in this core backbone converged network. Our data centers, which are connected at 100 gig redundant op centers, generation fleet, transmission substations, bulk subs, and many of the works headquarters will all be connected in that fiber network. As you go on down our business model, the field area network today, we have as many as 21 different solutions meeting business needs on the field area network. And obviously that gets very difficult to maintain. There's no synergy, there's a lack of reliability, and the complexity is very difficult to manage over time. We are emerging past 15,000 number of devices today that need to be managed. So our strategy is to build a private LTE network. We think that's the going forward standard that's going to carry us for this foreseeable future. A lot of flexibility and interoperability, which again, Matt already talked about. We also we view it using the field area network and the private LTE as a backhaul for our mesh network. And today, we currently support LNG's Gridstream in our advanced metering network. All this is going to intersect at your corporate network. So you're going to be integrating in the MPLS wide area network into the core network through the aggregation routers. And we've defined 5 different segments that will come into the data center. We'll be running quality of services on each BPRN with different service reliability. Within certain segments, such as the customer segment, you'll see micro-segmentation, such as TrustSec, being implemented. And we do have carrier partnerships where it comes to ISPs and cloud services, creating dynamic network connections for Office and through AWS, things like that. When it comes to spectrum, Ameren believes that there will be a need for multiple spectrums for the long-term needs of our field area network. We believe that and feel we should start with an anchor spectrum, at least for our needs. So we're looking at the general use of field area network where we have distribution automation sensors. We are currently looking at and piloted the 900 megahertz, and we feel that that creates a good anchor spectrum. And as we get more mature and our needs change, I want a smart substation, or if I have a wind farm, maybe I'm doing something with smart city, we think that other spectrums such as CBRS might be more valuable to support those app needs. So we need an environment in which I can manage all those spectrums within one pane of glass, if you will, some of the illustrations that we saw earlier, that we have a dynamic, easy to use, managed core and a speed to deployment that will meet our business needs. And one thing I think everybody needs to consider beyond just the technology is the workforce. Begin transitioning your skills, have those communications if you haven't already had with all your stakeholders. When we started our MPLS path, we brought not only business partners in, but we brought in our business managers from our local union. We even invited IBEW International to attend the initial meeting and tell them what our view of smart grid was, what that was going to do to the communication network and to relay. And so you begin to socialize that, and those folks become advocates for your change, even challenging what their job definitions are rather than fighting it. It's not always that easy, but it's a pathway that makes it easier. You also have to build a roadmap for how you're going to handle legacy skills while you transition. So you may have a bump in needs in terms of staffing until the legacy starts to move out. Consider your NOC and your field technicians. Do you have sufficient services and staff to provide reliability? We're going to have to grow our RF skills and even our tools. Last area on that is we wanted a valid and robust tool to manage fiber mapping and wireless mapping and our capabilities. But we wanted all that geospatial information to be able to lay back on Esri, which is a company standard where we can overlay network information on top of grid information, whether it's transmission, distribution, assets, and facilities. And so you begin to see where a lot of the different critical assets of the company can be overlaid and shared. Bobbi, if you don't mind, we could go ahead. So on this slide, we're just outlining some of the risk and issues with spectrum, and in this case, we're pursuing 900 megahertz because that's what we went after and got a waiver with the government, the FCC, to work on. So some of the impacts, if the FCC doesn't approve 900 megahertz, its stalls are going forward. We'll have to come up with a different spectrum. We like 900 because it propagates well, less towers to build. The impact if that doesn't go through would be high. The probability we think is low. We think eventually that is going to get rebanded. It's just a matter of time. So this is the world according to what we think. Spectrum clearing is going to have a high impact. I think it's probably going to be a medium impact probability, so I think it will happen. I think spectrum is going to take some time to clear, and particularly I think it's going to be a challenge around the railroads. And then adoption and device ecosystem has a high impact. We need partners that are building products in our space. Everything from narrowband $10, $15 devices to the $1,000 modems. The probability of that being an issue is low, just evidenced by the members on the UBBA and the questions we've been getting. And then the complexity. I think the complexity is going to be a high impact. Education reduces some of that, but also some of the products and services that our partners are developing, creating what I call the industrial version of a wild packet core and radio network. And then finally, skills. Skills is something we just talked about, and that's going to have a high impact. Go ahead to the next slide, if you don't mind. So my last slide, basically some other scope and directions. Our radio system still has quite a bit of life to depreciate. It's working fine. We think that replacement will happen in about 7 years. We could accelerate it if there's a benefit to doing that. We like that to operate on 406 band if that ever comes to fruition, because then I have to build no towers that will propagate straight where I'm at, we believe. Mobile cell phone use is still acquired through carriers. We're not going to replace our cell phone users at this time. Other spectrums might be available as anchor spectrum if 900 doesn't work out, but right now we see that as our best foot forward. We need to work on roaming agreements and understand how to approach that and how to utilize that. There is a great concern about backward compatibility for the IoT, the devices that I think Matt mentioned, longer life cycle. So as you upgrade the cores and maintain your cybersecurity, I still need to have backward compatibility for those devices. Imagine that I do robust censoring out in substations or on lines. I don't want to have to visit those every 5 years. The trip charge alone makes it unaffordable. So they have to have a longer life, maybe die out on the line. And then consideration of cloud services, how does that play or help in this environment? We've got to look at that. And finally, encryption will be end-to-end. And Bobbi, I think that ends my slides.
Excellent. John, thank you very much. Again, everyone will be taking questions at the end, so either go ahead and type them in your question box or just write them down and get ready for that. So now let me introduce to you Alan McIntyre from Southern Link. Alan is the engineering director at Southern Link, and he began his career with Southern Company and Southern Link in 1995. He received a Bachelor of Electrical Engineering and his MBA from Auburn University, and he currently serves on the Auburn University Wireless Advisory Board. So, Alan, we'll take it to you, sir.
All right, thanks, Bobbi. I thought I'd really start by kind of telling the story of how we ended up where we did, and it really somewhat starts out as a simple story. Back in the early 90s, there was a team that looked at the PTT radio systems across Southern Company. And at that time, there were 6. And believe it or not, even though, and you can see on the slide, Alabama Power had a 450 megahertz system and Georgia Power had a 450 megahertz system, neither of those were compatible with one another. So it was really an interoperability issue. So Georgia Power goes to help Mississippi Power after a hurricane. They had to pull their radio systems with them. And so the idea, like I said, it was pretty simple, was instead of having 6 disparate radio systems, why don't we have one across all of Southern Company? And so that's really how Southern Link was formed. And we really started then because we had excess capacity on that new radio network we sold commercially, which helped us in a couple other ways. But I'll kind of get into now really how we got to LT. And so, Bobbi, next slide, please. And so we built our 800 megahertz push-to-talk network across all 4 states. And then around 2010, it really became obvious that network then, in the next 5 years really would be a 20-year-old system and, kind of reaching its end of life. And so we started thinking through what do we need to do next. At the same time, Alabama Power had a SCADA network, MAS network that was a little bit older actually than the than the Southern Link push-to-talk network at the time. And so, cybersecurity at that point was certainly a growing concern. And doing cybersecurity on those older technologies, it was really, we were having to do a lot of bolt-on kind of items. And so it was getting cumbersome, I guess is the best way to put it. And so really wanted to look at kind of what's next. And so I think Matt and John both talked about it. I mean, we really looked at it from the standpoint of we've got multiple networks doing, really singular purposes. How could we do one network to do multiple purposes? And so again, trying to take a simple idea and really apply it again. And so that's really what we did. We also knew that the number of devices and the bandwidth requirements, everything we had at that point were narrowband technologies. So we knew all that was changing. And so we needed to get ahead of that curve a little bit. And so in 2015, we started construction of our LT network. And so kind of fast forward up to today, the network's commercially launched. We have both internal and external customers on the network, over 1,100 sites. We're still building cell sites. We'll be up over 1,300 by the end of next year. So we still have some work to do. But the interesting data point really as you consider LTE is really that growth in data devices. We estimated that when we were meeting in 2010, and then what we put in a business case, a couple of years later, it was really, it ramped up there. But the big thing is now with what we have on the network and what we're projected to have at the end of next year, it's doubled from our original business case, and from 2010 it's tripled. So even though we kind of projected that it would grow, it's really outpaced the growth that we foresaw, I guess 5 years ago, 6 years ago. So the growth in devices is definitely something to pay attention to. Bobbi, next slide. Thanks. And so as we started launching into building an LT network, we really wanted to take all the lessons we had learned from our IDE network, our older push-to-talk network. There were several things that, when we look back, we said, golly, if we could do it again, we'd do it this way. And so that's what we did with the LT network. We always wanted really two core networks for full geo redundancy. And so with LT, we were really able to do that. With some of the older technologies, it would really been kind of an active standby type situation. You just kind of hope that the standby was, up and operational when you needed it. With LT, you can really have both fully active all the time, and so that the core networks are capable of carrying traffic and they're operational. And so that's been a big benefit. We put in a lot of backup power. I mean, obviously, being a power company, you'd think that's easy, but having power, but we wanted to make sure. And so it's probably went, down a few levels in terms of how much backup power we have at both locations, but it's pretty impressive. Then to connect the core network out to the RAN, we really ran it all the way out. And so we put an MPLS network in while we were building the LT network. And so we wanted to really be able to leverage, and I'll touch on it in a second too. It's really a concept of being able to have alternate paths from a site back into the core network for redundancy. When we looked at our IDE network, our number one outage was really that last mile backhaul. It was about 93% of our outages were related to just last mile backhaul outages. And so, I mean, to really achieve a higher level of redundancy and resiliency on the network, we knew we had to address that. And so as part of the MPLS network and our last mile transport design, we really came up with a solution so we could have alternate paths into a lot of sites to create that, to really raise that level of redundancy and reliability. And then, we'd always put generators at most of our cell sites. That was a common design goal because, when the power's out and our crews are out or storm power, the communications networks kind of continue to work, and we can't take an outage due to power outages. And so the unique part about LT is we really experimented with something else. We went with hydrogen fuel cells. The power demand of LT versus older technology is much, much less. And so it kind of lent itself to the hydrogen fuel cell model. And so there's less maintenance than that with a generator. You got cranking battery, you got oil, belts, hoses, you got the whole 9 yards of things that can go wrong. With a hydrogen fuel cell, there's not any moving parts to go wrong. So again, looking for a way to increase reliability and resiliency after storms. So that was kind of unique. And so now we have a good mix between them too. And so and we've got different fuel sources between propane and hydrogen, so we kind of diversified some of those things. So that was a little bit of difference. And then obviously cybersecurity, touched on with older technologies. Really, we call it baked in now. With everything we do, we include our security team. They're part of all the design work and from the outset. And so Southern Company Security Operations Center monitors the network, so security is at the forefront of the whole network. And John touched on it. We've really set up roaming with the commercial carriers, and that's really our. I talked about dragging your radio system behind you. We really wanted it set up where when our crews go off to do mutual assistance, they just take their LT device. And so no matter where they go in the country, we're hoping it works. And so on a commercial carrier, and we really set up roaming agreements with multiple, so that it's really the idea of they go to the Northeast, like a Superstorm Sandy event, pretty devastating event, but you hope one of the carriers is still up. So if you have choices between 3 or 4 carriers, your law of probability is higher that one of them is still operational. So that was the thought. And then it gives us also potential disaster recovery if we ever suffered some major outage in our footprint, that we could enable that pretty quickly and get devices back up. So Bobbi, next slide. And so this is really what we're doing with the network. So I've kind of described, why we built it, how we built it. Really, I kind of touched on our original business case had some of the applications that you see kind of asterisk there, and it's a smaller subset, obviously, than what we're doing with the network today. The top one are handsets, and so we do have push to talk on the network as well as Multi. Works really well, and we're about to launch mobile hotspot as well. So fixed data devices, those started out really as routers, and we're kind of evolving that to a large degree now. Over on the right side of the column, you see a line fault current indicator. That's an embedded device. So there's an LT module built into a device that really kind of clamps onto a distribution line. And so really that's where we see things headed. And so down below there's network lighting controls, residential metering. Those we're really looking at as LT modules kind of built into a network lighting control that screws into a light, and then a residential meters, or really even we'll look at commercial and industrial metering, which right now we've been doing with a router. So I think there's a big potential on device growth in that area of embedded devices. And then mobile data devices, we do have Panasonic textbooks certified on our network, and so a lot of the crews have those. Storm trailer is really kind of a Wi-Fi application, just to get them Wi-Fi inside the trailer so they can really do mobile computing for the most part, and then vehicle location. So a lot of the applications of really in the fixed data that, you know, I think it probably goes without saying, you know, there are so many different business units within a large electric utility. And so they are coming up with applications, you know, pretty constantly. And so we're trying to meet those now, and it's really pretty exciting times for us. So, but hopefully that gives you a flavor, and I think Scott's got some more details around these cases. That's it for me, Bobbi.
Well, that was wonderful, Alan. Thank you very much. We're about to start our final speaker, but remember, if you have questions for the panelists, go ahead and type those in. We're going to try to get to as many as we can. We've already gotten quite a few, so I'm excited about that. Like I said, if we don't get to your question, we will come back and follow up via email with you. But let's go ahead and have Scott Wells from Ericsson set the stage for us. Scott has served as the sales director for utilities at Ericsson for the last 9 years. And so he's seen a lot of these use cases come about. He received his Bachelor of Science in Engineering Technology with a specialization in telecommunications from Texas A&M University. And Scott, the floor is yours, sir. Scott, you may be on mute.
Is that better?
Perfect, thank you.
Hello? Okay, sorry. Yeah, thank you, Bobbi. So today I'm going to present a brief overview of 5G, which can be the facilitator of broadband opportunities for utilities. I will start with what is 5G. So 5G stands for fifth generation wireless communications, and it promises mobile data speeds that far exceed the fastest home broadband network currently available to consumers. At its most basic level, 5G will be used to make calls, send texts, and to simply get online, but it's also going to be significantly faster than previous generations, which will open the door to a range of new use cases. The connectivity benefits of 5G will make businesses more efficient and give consumers access to more information faster than ever before. Super-connected autonomous cars, smart communities, industrial IoT, immersive education, and many more rely on 5G. 5G will likely be the biggest tech introduction since the internet. We all recognize the evolution of mobile communications and how this communication conduit has changed the lives of millions of people over the last 4 generations of mobile communications. 5G will represent the most significant change in communications since wireless was first introduced. Next slide, please. As we take a deeper dive into this evolution, we can reflect on where we started from the 1980s with 1G. Mobile phones were installed in cars and were very expensive to own and operate. Rolling into the 1990s, the phones themselves evolved to a format that could be carried in your pocket with 2G technology. In the 2000s, cameras and laptop connectivity became possible with 3G, and 4G garnered a new lifestyle with smartphone capabilities to the point where most folks are completely reliant and dependent on this means of communication. 5G will be significantly next step in our communications capabilities, providing for functionality and capability never before possible in wireless. Next slide, please. What can one expect from 5G? This slide provides a snapshot of the capabilities that will be possible with 5G. Peak data rates up to 20 gigabits per second, end user experience data rates up to 100 megabits per second, 5 nines of reliability, low latency attributes enabling mission critical and machine-to-machine communications with enhanced security are just some of the benefits that will be realized through 5G. It is important to state that 5G is not a 4G replacement. 5G is a focused augmentation of 4G. Investments made in 4G network infrastructure will not be lost, however, as a majority of the 4G networking infrastructure is also 5G capable. Next slide, please. So how can one deploy a 5G network? The most important puzzle piece needed is wireless spectrum. This slide attempts to provide a picture on spectrum that would be used for 5G through a golf club analogy. Low-band spectrum, i.e. sub 1 gigahertz, used for legacy 1G and 2G networks equates to a driver which can go a long way with less than ideal accuracy, which is equivalent to how I normally hit a driver. Mid-band spectrum in the 1 to 2.5 gig range operates in the mid-iron, allowing for decent distance or coverage with improved accuracy. As we get into the new allotment of mid-band spectrum for 5G communications, the 3.5 to 6 gigahertz range, we can look at this like a short iron or wedge, closer to the end user with more precision and higher bandwidth capabilities. And finally, the putter, the high band spectrum, the 24 gig to 48 gigahertz range, allows for very close or focused spectrum usage, providing for the highest bandwidth availability. The new 5G spectrum supporting a focused or directed deployment supports the 4G augmentation, where it makes the most sense for an operator to deploy. Next slide, please. To expand a little on the trade-offs one must consider with deploying higher band spectrum networks, this slide depicts the various scenarios. Higher band supporting the most bandwidth, the lowest latency, but with the least amount of coverage. Conversely, low band supports the best coverage, but the highest latency and the lowest bandwidth. An operator looking to deploy 5G network must be cognizant of these trade-offs before making a 5G decision. Next slide, please. The next logical question is why 5G? 5G would be a platform serving 4 major use cases: massive IoT, critical communications, enhanced mobile broadband, and fixed wireless access. An operator can choose to focus their 5G assets on any or all of these use cases, which best serves their needs. Next slide. With utilities, the most likely scenario for 5G deployment would be to modernize the grid. Traditionally, each use case on the grid would require completely separate serving networks, which results in highly complex operating structure, an inability to be nimble or quick to offer new solutions, and a high operating cost. The attributes that will be available with 5G provides an avenue for legacy networks to be consolidated onto one platform, supporting current and future offerings that a utility could leverage to grow and maintain the revenue base, because that utility would be able to meet their ever-changing and growing customer demands. This slide just highlights some of those utility-focused use cases. Next slide, please. The avenue a utility should consider would be a private LTE 5G network deployment. A utility with a private LTE 5G network would provide the capability to support any use case in a controlled environment. Utilities are much more cognizant of security, latency, survivability attributes due to the nature of their business. A private LTE 5G network would allow a utility to meet those requirements without any reliance on traditional operators that may or may not have designed the supporting network with the utility metrics in mind, adding risk and uncertainty to the utility company. Southern Link is a prime example of a utility that made that decision, as Alan pointed out in the slides earlier, to deploy an LTE network to best serve their customers. They wanted to make sure they had total control of how they support their needs and their business. Next slide. This slide's a bit of an eye chart, but I put in here to show some additional utility-based use cases and applications that you may not have considered. This is not an exhaustive list, as the ideas and applications are constantly evolving. As you can see, there are several use cases and applications for 5G and 5G enhanced, which is adding MIMO antenna technology, carrier aggregation, and many other items to further increase the bandwidth capabilities of 5G. With the new spectrum that are available today, 5G can be a facilitator of the evolution of the grid and the evolution of how utilities serve their current and future customer base. The possibilities are endless, and the time is right. Thank you for your time and attention. Back to you, Bobbi.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for wrapping it up. Scott, you did a great job there, as did all of our speakers. I want to thank them for that. So we have, just about 10 minutes here for Q&A. That was terrific. And we have a ton of questions. Again, I don't know if we'll get to all of those, but we'll do our very best to get to as many as we can. And then we'll follow up with each one of you on email for what you've asked about. So I wanted to start first with a question really for Alan McIntyre from Southern Link. And ask if you could, one question about, could you elaborate on what you mean by LTE roaming helping on mutual assistance? What use cases might be you be referring to there, sir?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. And so really it's push to talk is the main one now. Mobile hotspot could also be a benefit, mobile computing, but the main driver is, our linemen, they can take their day in, day out handset and how they use push to talk, leave the Southern Link network, which, really just covers, our footprint where they work day in, day out. But if they have to go for mutual assistance to Texas, then they take their handset and it continues to work just like it did in our footprint. And so that's the idea. And that's actually happened a few times now. I know we've gone off network to support Encore earlier this year, and we went up northeast somewhere as well. And both times roaming worked as designed, and they were able to just take the handset that they're used to, use it day in, day out, and communicate with one another, and actually, communicate back into their operation centers back in our footprint. And so it just makes it easier instead of having to, drag a 450 system behind them as they go and hand out radio devices for people to use. So it just simplifies everything. And so, if they can take the same device and just roam off network, basically.
Great. Thanks for that, Alan. Matt, if you're still where you can hear me, I know you're at an event. Thank you. You spoke a lot about standards and the needs there. Talk a little bit, if you would, about the driving forces and who's driving the development of those standards.
Yeah, so the standards development process under 3GPP has evolved over the years. Initially, it was developed by carriers for carriers, but in revision 13 and on, so 13, 14, 15, and now 16, the standards are expanding to cover additional things. So everybody thinks of LTE as being broadband for mobile phones, but they've now added mission critical. So for reliability, trying to achieve 5 nines or better reliability. So they've made augmentations to the network through redundancy and resiliency to achieve that ultra low latency for real-time process control. So that 1 millisecond from tower to device type control. They're thinking for autonomous controls. They've added direct mode for device-to-device communication without having infrastructure, and then they've added narrowband IoT for narrowband communication, and that's being done because the industry is seeing that there's need for this wireless technology to support many different applications. It's not just about mobile phones anymore, and it's not just about the consumer, that there's value in the business needs for industrial applications, and they've taken into account our needs in the utility business. And so now Southern Link's been an active participant. We're looking to become more involved. Multiple different utilities are now looking to directly participate in that 3GPP standardization process to meet our needs.
Great, Matt. Thank you. We got another question in for both John and Alan, and we would take answers from Scott and Matt too, if you like. But we saw one slide there at the end with a lot of use cases listed. But what use cases has private LTE made possible that perhaps were harder or more costly to realize before? If you can, I know I'm catching you off guard with some of these questions.
So this is John. Alan, if you don't care, I'll just jump in real quick. At Ameren, we tested a number of use cases, and we can make those available. But probably the best surprise was in our Teleruptor scheming. Today we use the SNC modems. They work really good, but they're line of sight. You have to put in repeaters. You have to have little more in-depth capability in the field than your field techs to build those networks and schemas out. You're putting in a backhaul through a gateway. We tested and again, we're not full production like Southern Link, but we did put our pilot in place. We're feeding a Teleruptor scheme system that we have up in Washington, Illinois, all the way back into our demand management system, and it's working great. Configuration and installation is a whole lot easier with LTE because you don't really have to find a line of sight and the configuration and lack of gateway. So that's just one small example where we found it easier. Hopefully that's in line with the question.
Thank you. Alan, anything you'd like to add there?
Yeah, and I'll probably approach it from maybe a different aspect, but even take something like AMI backhaul. We couldn't really support that with our narrowband networks previously, and so the business units used 3G mainly with commercial carriers. And so one thing we've seen, by having our own LTE network with the reliability and resiliency that we have, our availability is much, much better than what they were getting with the commercial carrier networks. And so, and that's important because, I think originally people may have thought of, meter AMI is really just, you get a reading each month and you generate a bill. Well, really it's become much, much greater for us where it's really operational data now that's collected very, very frequently throughout the day. And so not having it is really an operational impact. And so I think by having our own network with very high availability and reliability really enabled them to put, more emphasis to operationalize that network even more. So I would say that was definitely a change.
I mean, this is Matt. I would add on to that. We're seeing in doing the business cases for these projects that it's not that there's one thing that you couldn't necessarily not enable without some of the other strategies, but by pooling the investment in a couple of different places, land mobile radio replacement combined with a expansion of fixed data, we are now able to bring, as Alan was alluding to, more reliable communications that we control to our additional applications, and we cut our marginal cost of adding additional, say, cellular devices in the future. We have a couple of clients that have been deploying a lot of devices, and the easy thing for some of these non-critical applications to do is put them on the public cellular network, and that's great until that volume starts to get into the tens of thousands of devices, which sounds like a lot. But once you get to that tens of thousands number, the cost, you can actually start saving money because you're not paying on a per subscriber line basis. You're paying for the infrastructure, which is more capital intensive, which aligns with our business structure better. So once you've combined about 4 or 5 different applications, the business case looks a lot more appealing.
That's an excellent point, Matt. Thank you for chiming in there on that one. I am going to have to cut us off on questions right now. Just we are at the top of the hour. Like I said, for those of you whose questions we didn't get to, we will follow up with you directly. We do plan to, this was a recorded webinar, and we plan to make this available to everyone on the UBBA website soon. I don't want to put an actual time out there because I want to make sure we have time to make it pretty and get the MP4 loaded. So, but you will see that soon, and we'll let you know as soon as that is available on the UBBA.com website. So I want to thank you all again for joining the first Utility Broadband Alliance webinar today. Just a point of note, though, we will hold our first in-person event, the Utility Broadband Alliance Summit in Birmingham, Alabama on October 3rd and 4th, and it is hosted by Southern Link and will take place at the Alabama Power headquarters. We welcome you all to go to UBBA.com and click on the pop-up, and you'll go and be able to see the very robust program and set of speakers that we have lined up. You can feel free to reach out to me directly about questions about joining the Utility Broadband Alliance and our mission, about the event, about future events that we'll be doing. But for now, I would like to again thank our panelists for their time today. Thank all of you for joining us, and we hope to talk with you again very soon.